The thunder of hooves echoed across the desert plains as Bridget Whitaker ran for her life, the hem of her dusty blue dress clutched in white-knuckled hands. Behind her, the silhouette of Rattlesnake Ridge loomed against the setting sun of 1876 Wyoming Territory, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for her like hungry fingers. "You can't run from me forever, Miss Whitaker." Jasper Blackwell's gravelly voice carried on the wind. His laughter cold as the barrel of the Colt .45 he kept holstered at his side. Bridget's breath came in ragged gasps, her auburn hair falling loose from its pins as she pushed herself harder, desperate to reach the safety of Humboldt before Blackwell and his gang caught up with her. The small Wyoming settlement was her only hope now that she knew what they were planning. 3 days ago, she'd been nothing more than the daughter of a struggling shopkeeper, helping her father maintain their modest general store on Humboldt's Main Street. Now she was running for her life, the unwitting witness to a plot that would bring destruction to everything she held dear. Blackwell's boot steps crunched closer behind her as her legs began to falter. The man's shadow fell across her just before his rough hand grasped her shoulder, spinning her around to face him. "You've caused me enough trouble, girl." His face, scarred and weathered by years of lawlessness, twisted into a cruel smile. "Nobody crosses the Blackwell Gang and lives to tell the tale. People will look for me," Bridget said, lifting her chin despite her fear. Your father's got problems of his own," Blackwell cut in. "By the time he realizes you're missing, we'll be long gone with the Union Pacific payroll, and you'll be—" He trailed off, his meaning clear in the malicious gleam of his eyes. Bridget struggled against his grip. "You won't get away with this." Blackwell's laughter rumbled deep in his chest. "I already have." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold, Blackwell dragged Bridget toward his waiting men. The coming darkness would hide her fate from any prying eyes that might be watching from the distant town. 100 miles away, Thomas Archer pushed his horse harder, the animal's sides heaving with exertion as they thundered across the rugged terrain. His weathered face, bronzed from years under the western sun, was set in grim determination. The telegram had reached him just hours ago in Cheyenne, the message brief but urgent. "Blackwell Gang spotted near Humboldt. Stop. Union Pacific payroll at risk. Stop. Your assistance required. Stop." Thomas had been tracking Jasper Blackwell for 3 years, ever since the outlaw had killed his partner during a bank robbery in Denver. As a former U.S. Marshal turned bounty hunter, Thomas had made it his personal mission to bring Blackwell to justice. The trail had gone cold many times, but now he had a fresh lead, and nothing would stop him from reaching Humboldt in time. "Just a little farther, Samson," he murmured to his faithful stallion. "We'll rest at Willow Creek and push on at first light." The horse seemed to understand, finding a reserve of strength as they crested a hill. Below, the small creek glimmered in the moonlight, offering the promise of water and a brief respite. Thomas made camp quickly, his movements efficient after years on the trail. As he sat by his small fire, he studied the worn wanted poster he carried in his saddlebag. Blackwell's face stared back at him, the artist's rendition capturing the coldness in the outlaw's eyes. The reward for his capture had grown to $5,000 dead or alive, but Thomas wasn't in it for the money. This was about justice, about honoring the oath he'd taken years ago to uphold the law. He'd heard stories about Blackwell's cruelty, the trail of broken lives the outlaw left in his wake. Women and children weren't spared his brutality, and Thomas knew time was of the essence. The Union Pacific payroll was scheduled to arrive in Humboldt in 2 days' time. transported on the new rail line that had breathed life into the previously unremarkable settlement. Sleep came fitfully that night, Thomas's dreams haunted by memories of failures past. At first light, he was back in the saddle, Humboldt still a day's hard ride away. Bridget awoke to darkness and the rhythmic rocking of a moving wagon. Her head throbbed where Blackwell had struck her, and her wrists burned from the tight rope binding them behind her back. She tried to call out, but a cloth gag muffled her cries. Panic rose in her throat as she struggled to make sense of her surroundings. "She's awake," a gruff voice announced. Through the canvas covering of the wagon, Bridget could make out the silhouettes of two men sitting at the front. One turned to look at her, his face hidden in shadow. "Don't get any ideas," he warned. "Boss says your insurance in case things go south with the payroll job." Bridget's mind raced. Insurance? What did that mean? She remembered fragments of conversation. She'd overheard at her father's store Blackwell planning to rob the train carrying the Union Pacific payroll, discussing the newly laid tracks that ran just north of town. She'd been spotted listening and had fled, but not quickly enough. The wagon hit a rut, jolting Bridget against its wooden side. Pain shot through her shoulder, but she bit back her cry. She needed to stay alert, to look for any chance of escape. Her father would be frantic with worry by now, perhaps organizing a search party. But would they know which way to look? Blackwell and his men were experienced outlaws, experts at disappearing into the vast Wyoming wilderness. As dawn broke, the wagon came to a stop. The canvas was pulled back, and Bridget squinted in the sudden brightness. 4 men surrounded the wagon, all armed with Blackwell at their center. "Get her out," he ordered. Rough hands hauled Bridget from the wagon bed. Her legs, stiff from hours of immobility, nearly buckled beneath her. Someone ripped the gag from her mouth, and she gasped in the cool morning air. "Where are we?" she demanded, her voice hoarse. Blackwell gestured expansively. "Your new home, Miss Whitaker, at least for the next day or so." They stood in a small clearing, surrounded by scrubby pine trees. In the distance, Bridget could hear the faint rushing of water, a river or stream. Beyond that, just visible through the trees, she caught a glimpse of metal glinting in the sunlight. The railroad tracks. "The train's due tomorrow afternoon," Blackwell continued, watching her closely. "Carrying enough money to set me and my boys up for life. And you're going to help us make sure it stops right where we want it to." Bridget lifted her chin defiantly. "I'll do no such thing." Blackwell stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You don't have a choice, girl. Either you help us willingly, or we'll find a way to make you cooperate. There are many miles of track out here, and many ways to convince a stubborn woman." The threat hung in the air between them. Bridget swallowed hard, fighting back tears of fear and frustration. She wouldn't let this man see her break. "What exactly do you want me to do?" she asked, buying time as she scanned the camp for possible escape routes. Blackwell's thin lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Smart girl. I knew you'd see reason." As he outlined his plan, Bridget's blood ran cold. Blackwell intended to use her as bait, a damsel in distress, to force the train to stop. It was cruel, calculating, and just might work if the engineer had any humanity. "And after?" she dared to ask. Blackwell shrugged. "If you behave, maybe we'll let you go. If not." He let the implication hang in the air between them. They were lying, Bridget knew. Once they had the money, she would become a liability, a witness who could identify them all. Her only hope was to find a way to escape before the train arrived the following day. As the outlaws set up camp, Bridget was tied to a tree at the edge of the clearing, her bonds just loose enough to allow minimal movement but not escape. From her position, she could see the men preparing for the robbery, cleaning weapons and discussing their plans in low voices. One man, younger than the others, occasionally glanced her way, something like uncertainty in his expression. The day wore on, hot and uncomfortable. Bridget was given water but little food, her requests to tend to personal needs granted grudgingly and under guard. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply, and she shivered against the tree trunk, wondering if her father had realized yet that she hadn't simply run an errand or visited a friend. Would anyone connect her disappearance to Blackwell's gang? And even if they did, would help arrive in time? Thomas arrived in Humboldt as the sun reached its zenith, his horse lathered and breathing heavily from the hard journey. The town was smaller than he'd expected, a single main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple at one end and a saloon at the other. Activity centered around the newly built train station, where workers loaded supplies and townsfolk gathered to socialize. He led Samson to the water trough outside the livery stable, allowing the exhausted animal to drink while he surveyed his surroundings. A wanted poster tacked to the wall of the sheriff's office caught his eye. Jasper Blackwell's face stared back at him, the reward now listed at $6,000. Someone had been busy updating the posters since Thomas had last seen one. The sheriff's office seemed the logical place to start. Thomas tied Samson to the hitching post and stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath his boots. A middle-aged man with a salt and pepper mustache looked up from his desk, hand instinctively moving toward the gun at his hip. "Can I help you, stranger?" the sheriff asked, eyes narrowing slightly. Thomas removed his hat, revealing the dust of the trail on his face and clothes. "Thomas Archer. I received a telegram about Blackwell's gang being in the area." Recognition flickered in the sheriff's eyes. "Archer, heard of you. Former marshal out of Denver, right? Didn't know my telegram would reach you specifically." "It didn't," Thomas admitted. "It reached the marshal's office in Cheyenne. I happened to be there tracking Blackwell already." The sheriff stood, extending his hand. "Sheriff James Cooper. Glad to have you here, Archer. We're a small town with limited resources, and Blackwell's got at least 5 men with him." They shook hands, and Cooper gestured to a chair. "Sit down. You look like you've ridden hard to get here." Thomas sat, grateful for the moment's rest. "What's the situation?" Cooper's expression grew grim. "Blackwell and his men were spotted outside town 3 days ago. Then yesterday, Walter Whitaker reported his daughter missing. Bridget, 22 years old, works at her father's general store. Nobody's seen her since the day before yesterday." "You think Blackwell took her?" Thomas asked, a cold feeling settling in his gut. "It's more than a hunch," Cooper confirmed. "One of my deputies found tracks heading north out of town toward the new railroad, multiple horses and a wagon. And one of the locals reported seeing a woman matching Bridget's description being forced into a wagon outside town." "Why would Blackwell take a hostage?" Thomas wondered aloud. "It's not his usual method." Cooper moved to a map pinned to the wall. "My guess, it has something to do with this." He tapped a point on the map where the railroad curved around a hillside. "The Union Pacific payroll train is due through tomorrow afternoon. If I wanted to rob it, that's where I'd do it. The train has to slow down for that curve." Thomas studied the map. "But a modern locomotive can't be stopped quickly, even if they blocked the track, unless they had something the engineer wouldn't want to run over," Cooper interrupted grimly. "Or someone." The implication hung heavy in the air. Thomas had seen many cruel acts in his years as a lawman, but using an innocent woman as a human obstacle to stop a train struck him as particularly heinous. "We need to move quickly," Thomas said, standing. "How many men can you spare?" Cooper sighed. "That's the problem. Most of the able-bodied men in town are either working the silver mine 10 miles south or have gone to Cheyenne for supplies. I've got 2 deputies, both green. I sent a telegram to Laramie for reinforcements, but they won't arrive until tomorrow at the earliest. Then we go with what we have, Thomas decided. The longer we wait, the more danger Miss Whitaker is in. There's something else you should know, Cooper added hesitantly. Walter Whitaker is organizing his own search party, hot-headed men, most of them with more enthusiasm than skill. If they blunder into Blackwell's camp, Thomas nodded grimly. We need to leave within the hour. Can your deputies be ready? As Cooper went to gather his men, Thomas returned to the livery stable to arrange for a fresh horse. Sampson had given his all to get here, but the stallion needed rest. The livery owner, a grizzled man named Harlan, offered his fastest mount, a spirited bay mare named Willow. She's the fastest thing on 4 legs in the county, Harlan boasted as he saddled the horse. If you're going after Blackwell, you'll need her. Thomas thanked the man, adding, What can you tell me about Bridget Whitaker? Harlan's weathered face softened slightly. Good girl, that one. Smart, too. Helps her father run the store since her mother passed a few years back. Popular in town, pretty, but not the kind to know it, if you understand my meaning. Thomas nodded, taking in the information. It painted a picture of an innocent caught up in Blackwell's web of violence. Another reason to find her quickly. By mid-afternoon, Thomas was riding north with Sheriff Cooper and his 2 deputies, following the trail left by Blackwell's wagon. Cooper's younger deputy, a nervous boy barely out of his teens, kept scanning the horizon as if expecting an ambush at any moment. First time facing real outlaws. Thomas asked him quietly. The deputy nodded. Yes, sir, only been wearing the badge for 3 months. Stay alert but calm, Thomas advised. Blackwell's dangerous, but he's also human. He makes mistakes like anyone else. Is it true what they say about him? The deputy asked. That he killed those children in Colorado? Thomas's jaw tightened. Yes, and many others, which is why we need to find Miss Whitaker before he decides she's outlived her usefulness. They rode in silence after that, each man lost in his thoughts as they followed the increasingly clear trail. Blackwell wasn't bothering to hide his tracks, suggesting either overconfidence or a tight timeline. Thomas hoped it was the former, but feared it was the latter. As dusk approached, they spotted smoke rising above the tree line ahead. Cooper signaled for them to dismount and proceed on foot. Thomas drew his Winchester rifle from its saddle scabbard, checking that it was loaded before following the sheriff into the trees. They moved quietly, using hand signals to communicate as they approached the source of the smoke. Through the branches, Thomas caught glimpses of a camp, several men moving around a fire, a wagon parked to one side, and a figure slumped against a tree at the edge of the clearing. Bridget. Even from this distance, he could see that she was bound, her head hanging forward as if exhausted or unconscious. Anger flared in Thomas's chest, but he tamped it down. Emotion had no place in a situation like this. Clear thinking was what would keep the girl alive. Cooper joined him behind a large pine, surveying the camp. I count 6 men, he whispered. Blackwell by the fire, recognizable by that scar on his face. The others must be his gang. Thomas nodded. We're outnumbered and they have the hostage. Direct confrontation would be suicide. What do you suggest? Cooper asked. Thomas studied the layout of the camp, noting the positions of the outlaws. Night's falling. We wait until they are asleep, then I'll try to get to the girl. If I can free her without raising the alarm, we might be able to slip away. Otherwise, we fight, Cooper finished grimly. They retreated to where they'd left their horses and the other deputies. As they waited for full darkness to fall, Thomas checked and rechecked his weapons. His Colt revolver was loaded and oiled, as was the Winchester. He carried a Bowie knife in his boot and another smaller blade in his belt. If things went badly, He intended to take as many of Blackwell's gang with him as possible. When the moon rose, casting silver light through the trees, Thomas prepared to make his move. "If you hear shooting," he told Cooper, "come in fast and hard. Otherwise, I'll try to bring her out to you." Cooper handed him a flask. "For luck." Thomas took a small sip of the whiskey, feeling it burn a trail down his throat, before returning the flask and moving silently toward Blackwell's camp. The night had grown bitterly cold, and Bridget struggled to stop her teeth from chattering. The thin dress she wore provided little protection against the Wyoming night, and the ropes binding her to the tree cut into her wrists with every movement. Most of Blackwell's men had retired to their bedrolls, with only 2 remaining awake, one standing guard at the edge of camp, and Blackwell himself, sitting by the dying fire cleaning his revolver. She had spent the day observing the camp, listening to snatches of conversation, trying to piece together the full extent of their plan. Tomorrow, they intended to lay her across the railroad tracks shortly before the payroll train was due. The curve in the track would prevent the engineer from seeing her until it was too late to stop unless they slowed down first, making them vulnerable to ambush. It was a cruel plan, one that placed little value on her life, if the train didn't stop in time. Bridget shuddered, not wanting to think about what would happen to her. Movement in the trees beyond the guard caught her attention. At first, she thought it might be an animal, a deer perhaps, or a wolf drawn by the smell of their cooking. But then she glimpsed a human figure slipping from shadow to shadow with deliberate purpose. Hope flared briefly in her chest. Had her father found her? Was it the sheriff? She kept her expression carefully neutral, not wanting to alert her captors. The guard seemed oblivious, more focused on staying warm than watching the perimeter of the camp. The shadowy figure moved closer, now clearly visible to Bridget as a man. Tall and broad-shouldered, he carried a rifle and moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. Not her father, then, nor anyone she recognized from Humboldt. As Blackwell stood and stretched, heading toward his bedroll, the stranger froze, becoming one with the shadows. When the outlaw leader had settled, the man resumed his careful approach, working his way around to where Bridget was tied. The guard turned suddenly, peering into the darkness, and Bridget held her breath. After a moment, the man shrugged and returned to his post, stamping his feet against the cold. Minutes later, Bridget felt a presence behind her, then the light touch of a hand on her shoulder. She stiffened, unsure whether to be relieved or terrified. "Don't make a sound," a deep voice whispered close to her ear. "I'm here to help you." She felt the cold metal of a knife blade against her wrists, then the blessed release as the ropes fell away. Blood rushed painfully back into her hands, and she bit her lip to keep from crying out. "Can you walk?" the stranger asked, his voice barely audible. Bridget nodded, then realized he might not be able to see the gesture in the darkness. "Yes," she breathed. "Follow me. Stay low and quiet." With extraordinary care, the man helped her to her feet. Bridget's legs trembled beneath her, stiff from hours of immobility, but she forced herself to move. Each step was agony as circulation returned to her limbs, but the alternative remaining in Blackwell's clutches was unthinkable. They had almost reached the tree line when disaster struck. Bridget's foot caught on an exposed root, sending her stumbling forward with a startled gasp. It wasn't loud, but in the quiet of the night it might as well have been a shout. "Who's there?" the guard called, reaching for his gun. "Run." Her rescuer commanded, shoving her toward the trees as he raised his rifle. Bridget ran, ignoring the pain in her legs and the branches that tore at her face and dress. Behind her, she heard a single shot, then shouting as the camp erupted into chaos. More gunfire followed, the distinctive crack of revolvers joining the deeper boom of rifles. She wanted to stop to look back to see if her rescuer was following, but fear drove her forward into the darkness. Suddenly, hands grabbed her from behind a tree. She opened her mouth to scream, but a hand clamped over it. "Easy, miss," a voice hissed. "Sheriff Cooper. We're here to help." Relief flooded through her as the hand was removed. In the dim moonlight, she could make out the star-shaped badge on the man's chest. "There's another man back there," she gasped. "He cut me free." "Archer," Cooper nodded. "Best bounty hunter in the territory. If anyone can handle himself, it's him." As if to contradict his words, the gunfire intensified. Cooper pushed Bridget behind him, drawing his revolver. "Stay with my deputy," he ordered, indicating a young man who materialized from the shadows. "Evan, get her to the horses and back to town if we're not out in 10 minutes. "Yes, sir," the deputy replied, taking Bridget's arm. "This way, miss." "But your friend," Bridget protested. "Archer knew the risks," Cooper said grimly, already moving toward the gunfire. "Keeping you safe is what matters now." The deputy led Bridget deeper into the forest, away from the sounds of battle. They moved as quickly as possible in the darkness, the young lawman constantly glancing over his shoulder. After what seemed like an eternity of stumbling through underbrush, they reached a small clearing where 4 horses waited, tethered to low branches. "Are you hurt, miss?" the deputy asked as he helped her to a fallen log where she could sit. Bridget shook her head, though in truth, her wrists were raw from the ropes, and numerous scratches covered her arms and face. "Who was that man? The one who freed me?" "Thomas Archer," the deputy replied, pride evident in his voice. "Used to be a U.S. Marshal. Now he hunts men like Blackwell for the bounty. Sheriff says he's the best tracker this side of the Mississippi." The gunfire had diminished to occasional shots, then stopped altogether. Bridget and the deputy waited in tense silence, straining to hear any sound from the direction of the camp. Minutes stretched interminably until finally, twigs snapped nearby. The deputy drew his gun, positioning himself in front of Bridget. "Who's there?" "It's Cooper," came the reply. "With Archer." The sheriff emerged from the trees, supporting a tall man whose left arm hung limply at his side, dark with what Bridget realized must be blood. "Is he?" the deputy began. "I'll live," the wounded man grunted. "Bullet just grazed me. How's the girl?" Bridget stood, getting her first clear look at her rescuer in the moonlight. Thomas Archer was older than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his mid-30s, with dark hair streaked with silver at the temples, and a beard that didn't quite hide a scar along his jawline. His eyes, when they met hers, were a startling blue even in the darkness. "I'm unharmed, thanks to you," she said, moving forward to help support him. "But you're bleeding." Archer allowed himself to be lowered to the log, grimacing as Cooper examined his wound. "Blackwell's dead," he announced flatly. "2 of his men as well, the others scattered." "Dead," Bridget repeated, conflicting emotions washing over her. Relief that the outlaw could never threaten her again, shock at how quickly violence had erupted, and an unexpected pang of regret that justice would never be properly served. "He drew on me," Archer explained, meeting her gaze steadily. "It was him or me." Cooper finished binding Archer's arm with a strip of cloth torn from his own shirt. "We need to get you both back to town. Blackwell's remaining men might regroup and come looking for revenge." "What about the train?" Bridget asked suddenly. They were planning to rob the Union Pacific payroll tomorrow. With Blackwell dead and their plan exposed, they'll likely abandon the attempt, Cooper reassured her. "But I'll send a telegram to the railroad company first thing tomorrow, just to be sure." Archer stood, testing his injured arm gingerly. "We should move. If any of Blackwell's men are still nearby, they heard the shooting and know where to look." He approached the bay mare tethered nearby, but Cooper shook his head. You're in no condition to ride alone, Archer. You'll share with Miss Whitaker. My horse is steadier and she can help keep you upright. Bridget expected the bounty hunter to protest, but he merely nodded, his face pale in the moonlight. Cooper helped them both mount, Bridget sitting behind Archer with her arms wrapped carefully around his waist to steady him. The closeness to a stranger was improper, but given the circumstances, propriety seemed the least of her concerns. They rode through the night, following a trail known to Cooper that would take them back to Humboldt more directly than the route they'd used to track Blackwell. Bridget could feel Archer's strength ebbing as they traveled, his body growing heavier against her supporting arms. "Stay awake, Mr. Archer," she urged when she felt him sway dangerously in the saddle. "Tell me about yourself. How did you become a bounty hunter?" It was a transparent attempt to keep him conscious, but he seemed to understand its purpose. "Was a marshal," he said, his voice rougher than before. "In Colorado. Partner was killed by Blackwell during a bank robbery. Authorities wouldn't authorize the resources to go after him properly, so I turned in my badge and went hunting on my own terms. And you've been tracking him ever since?" Bridget asked, surprised. 3 years, Archer confirmed. "Tracked him through 5 territories, always one step behind. Until now." "That's a long time to pursue one man," Bridget observed. Archer was silent for so long she thought he might have passed out. Finally, he said quietly, "Some debts can only be paid in blood." The stark words sent a chill through Bridget that had nothing to do with the cold night air. She understood revenge, had felt it herself when Blackwell had terrorized her, but to dedicate years of one's life to hunting another human being spoke of a darkness she couldn't fathom. "And now that it's done," she asked, "what will you do?" Again, the long silence before his answer. "Don't know. Haven't thought beyond finding Blackwell." It struck Bridget as unutterably sad that this man had defined his existence around vengeance for so long that he had no vision of life beyond it. Before she could respond, Cooper called back to them. "Town's just ahead. We'll have the doctor look at that arm, Archer." Relief washed over Bridget as the first buildings of Humboldt came into view, illuminated by lamplight despite the late hour. Word of their approach must have spread, for people were emerging from homes and businesses, gathering in the street to witness their return. At the front of the crowd stood her father, his face haggard with worry. When he spotted her, he pushed through the throng, running to meet them as Cooper led their horses down the main street. "Bridget, thank God," Walter Whitaker cried, reaching up to help her down from the horse. "I feared the worst when they said Blackwell had taken you." She fell into his embrace, suddenly overwhelmed by all she had endured. "I'm all right, Father. These men saved me." Walter looked up at Archer, who was now slumped forward in the saddle, barely conscious. "Get this man to the doctor immediately," he commanded, his voice breaking with emotion. "Whatever he needs, I'll pay for it." As Cooper and the deputy helped Archer down from the horse, Bridget caught a last glimpse of the bounty hunter's face, pale and drawn with pain. His eyes, fever-bright, met hers briefly before he was led away toward the doctor's office. It would be 3 days before she saw him again. The doctor insisted on keeping Thomas under observation, concerned about infection in his wound and the general state of exhaustion that had left him vulnerable to fever. For the first day, he drifted in and out of consciousness, unaware of the town's celebration over Blackwell's demise or the telegram from the territorial governor commending his actions. On the second day, the fever broke, and Thomas awoke to find Sheriff Cooper sitting beside his bed, whittling a piece of wood. "Welcome back," Cooper said, setting aside his project. "Beginning to think you might sleep through till Christmas." Thomas attempted to sit up, wincing as pain shot through his left arm. "How long?" 2 days, Cooper replied, pouring a glass of water and helping Thomas drink. Doctor says you were running on empty even before you got shot. When was the last time you slept properly or ate a decent meal? Thomas ignored the question. The girl, Miss Whitaker, safe with her father. She's been asking about you. Cooper hesitated, then added, the whole town's talking about what you did, taking on Blackwell's gang practically single-handed. The territorial governor has added a bonus to the bounty. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. I didn't do it for the money. I know, Cooper said quietly, but $7,000 will help you start fresh somewhere. Now that Blackwell's gone, you could settle down, maybe use those tracking skills for something besides hunting men. The suggestion stirred something in Thomas that he had long suppressed, the possibility of a life beyond vengeance. He had spent so many years pursuing Blackwell that he scarcely remembered what it felt like to have a home, to be part of a community, rather than perpetually passing through. Maybe, he conceded, more to end the conversation than out of any real conviction. Cooper seemed to sense his discomfort. Well, doctor says you need rest. I'll check on you tomorrow. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Archer. The Whitakers have invited you to dinner once you're back on your feet. Walter wants to thank you properly for saving his daughter. After Cooper left, Thomas lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The thought of a formal dinner with the Whitakers made him uneasy. He was accustomed to campfires and saloons, not polite society. Besides, once he collected the bounty on Blackwell, he would move on, as he always did. Getting involved with the locals would only complicate matters. Yet the image of Bridget Whitaker's face in the moonlight lingered in his mind, her courage despite her fear, her concern for him despite her own ordeal. There had been something in her eyes when she looked at him, something that had touched a part of him he'd thought long dead. Ridiculous, he told himself firmly. She was grateful, nothing more. A young woman from a respectable family would have no real interest in a man like him, with his violent past and uncertain future. By the third day, Thomas was chafing at his confinement. The doctor reluctantly agreed to release him, with strict instructions to avoid strenuous activity and to change the bandage on his arm daily. Thomas's saddlebags and weapons had been brought to the doctor's office, along with his share of the reward money for Blackwell, an impressive stack of bills that represented freedom, if only he knew what to do with it. He dressed carefully in his cleanest shirt, painfully aware of how trail-worn his appearance remained despite his efforts. As he stepped out onto the boardwalk, the brightness of the day momentarily blinded him after the dimness of the sick room. Mr. Archer. Thomas turned toward the voice, squinting against the sun. Bridget Whitaker was crossing the street toward him, a basket over her arm, her auburn hair neatly pinned beneath a modest bonnet. She wore a simple blue dress that complemented her fair complexion and brought out the green of her eyes. Several townspeople watched with interest as she approached him. Miss Whitaker, he greeted her, suddenly conscious of his rough appearance compared to her neatness. I'm glad to see you recovered from your ordeal. She smiled, the expression transforming her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. Thanks to you. I was just coming to see if you were well enough for visitors. She held up the basket. I brought some fresh bread and preserves. Hospital food is notoriously bland. The thoughtfulness of the gesture caught Thomas off guard. That's very kind, but as you can see, I've been released from the doctor's care. All the better, she replied smoothly. You must be hungry for a proper meal. Father and I would be honored if you would join us for dinner tonight. Seeing his hesitation, she added, Please, Mr. Archer. It would mean a great deal to us both to thank you properly. Thomas knew he should refuse. The sensible thing would be to collect his horse, his reward money, and ride out of Humboldt today. Yet something in Bridget's earnest expression made him reconsider. "I'd be honored," he heard himself say. "What time should I arrive?" "6 o'clock," she answered, clearly pleased. "We're just above the general store. The staircase at the back leads to our living quarters." After confirming the address, Bridget continued on her way to deliver the basket to another recipient, leaving Thomas standing on the boardwalk, wondering what had possessed him to accept her invitation. He had never been comfortable in social situations, preferring the solitude of the trail to the complexities of human interaction. Still, he had given his word. He would attend the dinner, express his appreciation for their hospitality, and make his excuses to leave town the following day. Simple enough. With several hours to kill before the dinner, Thomas headed to the bathhouse to wash away the grime of his travels, then visited the barber for a much-needed haircut and trim of his beard. The barber, a talkative man named Sullivan, regaled him with local gossip as he worked. "Whole town's talking about you, Mr. Archer," Sullivan said, snipping carefully around Thomas's ears. "Taking down Jasper Blackwell is no small feat. He's been terrorizing the territory for years." Thomas remained silent, uncomfortable with the attention. "Miss Whitaker's been singing your praises too," Sullivan continued, oblivious to Thomas's discomfort. "Says you're the bravest man she's ever met. Half the young men in town are green with envy, let me tell you." This caught Thomas's attention. Envy? Why would they envy a bounty hunter? Sullivan chuckled. "Miss Bridget's considered quite a catch in Humboldt. Pretty, educated, and set to inherit her father's business someday. Several local boys have tried courting her, but she's never shown interest. Now she's personally inviting you to dinner. Tongues are wagging, Mr. Archer." Thomas frowned. The last thing he wanted was to be the subject of local gossip, especially if it involved romantic speculation about him and Bridget Whitaker. He would need to be particularly careful at dinner to maintain a respectful distance. After finishing at the barber's, Thomas visited the general store to purchase a new shirt and necktie for the evening. To his dismay, Walter Whitaker himself was behind the counter. "Mr. Archer," the storekeeper exclaimed, coming around to shake Thomas's hand vigorously. "Just the man I wanted to see. Bridget tells me you've accepted our dinner invitation." "Yes, sir," Thomas confirmed, somewhat overwhelmed by the man's enthusiasm. "It's very kind of you." "Nonsense. Least we can do after what you did for my daughter." Walter's expression grew serious. "I don't know how I can ever repay you for bringing her home safely, Mr. Archer, when I think what might have happened if you hadn't found her." "Anyone would have done the same," Thomas said uncomfortably. Walter shook his head. "No, sir. Not anyone would have tracked those outlaws through the wilderness and faced them down, outnumbered as you were. You're a remarkable man, Mr. Archer." Before Thomas could protest further, Walter was helping him select a fine cotton shirt and a modest necktie. When Thomas attempted to pay, the storekeeper waved him away. "Consider it a gift," Walter insisted, "though it's a poor token compared to what you've given us." By the time 6 o'clock arrived, Thomas was more nervous than he had been facing down Blackwell's gang. He stood at the foot of the staircase behind the general store, the new shirt feeling stiff around his neck, the borrowed suit coat from Cooper slightly too tight across his shoulders. In his hand, he held a small bouquet of wildflowers, purchased from a young girl selling them on the street corner. Taking a deep breath, he climbed the stairs and knocked on the door. It opened almost immediately, as if Bridget had been waiting just inside. The smile that lit her face when she saw him caused an unexpected flutter in Thomas's chest. "Mr. Archer, welcome," she greeted him, stepping back to allow him entry. "Father and I were just discussing you." "All good things, I hope," Thomas replied, handing her the wildflowers with a self-conscious gesture. "These are for you, A small thank you for the invitation." Bridget's face softened as she took the bouquet. "They're beautiful. How thoughtful of you. Please, come in and make yourself comfortable while I put these in water." The Whitakers' home was modest but well appointed, with polished furniture and carefully chosen decorations that spoke of refined taste despite limited means. Walter emerged from what appeared to be a small study, greeting Thomas warmly and offering him a glass of sherry. "Not often we get a genuine hero in our home," Walter said, guiding Thomas to a comfortable armchair. "Bridget hasn't stopped talking about your rescue since she came home." "I'm no hero, Mr. Whitaker," Thomas protested. "Just a man doing what needed to be done." Walter studied him with shrewd eyes. "Modesty, too. You're a rare breed, Archer." Bridget returned with the flowers arranged in a cut glass vase, which she placed on the small dining table already set for three. "Dinner's almost ready," she announced. "I hope you like roast beef, Mr. Archer." "Thomas, please," he found himself saying. And yes, roast beef sounds wonderful. Dinner proved to be a surprisingly pleasant affair. The food was excellent roast beef with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and an apple pie for dessert that Thomas declared the best he'd ever tasted. The conversation flowed more easily than he had expected, with Walter sharing stories of Humboldt's early days and Bridget displaying a quick wit and intelligence that Thomas found increasingly attractive. "So, what will you do now, Thomas?" Walter asked as they lingered over coffee after the meal. "With Blackwell gone, will you return to being a marshal?" Thomas hesitated. It was a question he had been avoiding since Blackwell's death. "I haven't decided," he admitted. "The badge and I parted ways some time ago. Not sure they'd have me back, even if I wanted to return." "Well, Humboldt could use a man with your skills," Walter suggested. "The town's growing with the railroad, and Sheriff Cooper mentioned he's considering hiring another deputy." Thomas glanced at Bridget, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I've never stayed in one place for long," he said carefully. "Not sure I'd make a good deputy." "Perhaps you just haven't found the right place to stay," Bridget suggested softly. There was something in her voice that made Thomas look at her more closely. The lamplight caught the auburn highlights in her hair and the warmth in her green eyes. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it might be like to have a home here, to see those eyes across the breakfast table each morning. The thought both attracted and terrified him. "Perhaps," he conceded, setting down his coffee cup. "But I should be going. It's getting late and you've both been more than kind." As he stood to leave, Walter pressed a small package into his hands. "Just a few things for your journey whenever you decide to undertake it." At the door, Bridget stepped forward. "I'll walk Mr. Archer downstairs, Father." Walter nodded, giving Thomas a final handshake. "Remember what I said about Humboldt needing good men, Archer. The offer stands should you decide to stay." Outside, the night was clear, stars speckling the vast Wyoming sky. Bridget walked beside Thomas in silence for a moment, her shawl pulled tight against the evening chill. "Will you really leave?" she asked finally, stopping at the bottom of the stairs. Thomas sighed. "It's what I do, Miss Whitaker. I don't put down roots." "Bridget," she corrected him. "And perhaps it's time you did." She looked up at him, her expression earnest in the moonlight. "Not everyone is meant to wander forever, Thomas." Something in her words touched a loneliness within him that he had denied for too long. Standing there, with this brave, beautiful woman looking at him as if he were something more than the violence that had defined his life, Thomas felt a crack form in the walls he had built around his heart. "Good night, Bridget," he said softly, resisting the unexpected urge to touch her face. "Thank you for dinner." He turned and walked away, feeling her eyes on his back until he rounded the corner toward the hotel. The warmth of the Whitakers' home stayed with him, a stark contrast to the empty hotel room that awaited him. For the first time in years, the prospect of riding out alone held no appeal. The next morning, Thomas rose early and went to the telegraph office. He sent 2 messages, one to his former superior in Denver, inquiring about the possibility of reinstatement, and another to a contact in Cheyenne who might know of any remaining members of Blackwell's gang still at large. As he left the office, he nearly collided with Bridget, who was carrying a basket of supplies from the general store. "Thomas," she exclaimed, clearly surprised to see him, "I thought you might have left already." He helped her steady the basket. "Not yet. I have some unfinished business to attend to first." Hope flickered briefly in her eyes. "Then you'll be staying in Humboldt a while longer." "A few days at least," he confirmed, "until I receive replies to some telegrams I've sent." Bridget smiled, the simple expression lighting up her face in a way that made Thomas's heart skip. "Then perhaps you join me for a walk this afternoon. I could show you more of the town." It was a transparent excuse. Humboldt was small enough to see in its entirety in less than an hour, but Thomas found himself agreeing nonetheless. "I'd like that. Shall I call for you at the store?" 3 o'clock, she nodded, clearly pleased. "Don't forget." As if he could, Thomas thought as he watched her continue down the street, greeting neighbors and shopkeepers with easy familiarity. The sense of community evident in those simple interactions stirred an unexpected longing in him. How long had it been since anyone had greeted him by name, not as a bounty hunter or former lawman, but simply as a man? At 3 o'clock precisely, Thomas arrived at the general store. Walter Whitaker looked up from arranging a display of canned goods, his expression warming when he saw Thomas. "Archer, right on time. Bridget's just finishing up in the stockroom." Thomas nodded, suddenly awkward. "I hope you don't mind my taking up more of your daughter's time, Mr. Whitaker." Walter's eyes twinkled. "Mind, my dear fellow, I'm delighted." It's about time Bridget had the company of someone worthy of her attention. These local boys have nothing to offer a girl with her spirit. Before Thomas could respond to this surprising statement, Bridget emerged from the back of the store, a light jacket over her dress and a small bonnet protecting her from the afternoon sun. "Ready?" she asked, her smile sending an unexpected warmth through Thomas's chest. They walked through Humboldt, Bridget pointing out buildings and sharing stories of the town's history. The settlement had been established just 5 years earlier, growing rapidly with the arrival of the railroad. Many of the buildings were new, the wood still bright and unweathered. "It's strange to think that none of this existed when I was a child," Bridget mused as they passed the newly constructed schoolhouse. "We came here from Pennsylvania when I was 17, after Mother died. Father thought a fresh start would help us both." "And did it?" Thomas asked, genuinely curious. Bridget considered the question. "For Father, yes. He found purpose in building the store and becoming part of this community. For me," she hesitated, "I sometimes feel there should be more to life than helping in the store and attending church socials." "What would you do if you could do anything?" Thomas found himself asking. The question seemed to surprise her. "No one's ever asked me that before." She thought for a moment. "I'd like to travel, see San Francisco perhaps, or even New York." "I've read about such places, but reading isn't the same as seeing with your own eyes." Thomas nodded, understanding the desire. "They're impressive cities, very different from Humboldt." "You've been to them?" Bridget asked, eyes wide with interest. "San Francisco, yes. New York only briefly." Thomas found himself sharing stories of his travels that he hadn't thought about in years: the grandeur of San Francisco Bay, the bustling energy of eastern cities, the stark beauty of the desert territories. Bridget listened intently, asking questions that revealed a keen intelligence and curiosity about the world beyond Wyoming. As they walked, Thomas realized he was enjoying himself more than he had in longer than he could remember. There was something refreshing about seeing the world through Bridget's eyes, about being appreciated for his experiences rather than his skill with a gun. Their walk took them to the edge of town, where the newly constructed rail station stood. A train was due later that afternoon, the same train that Blackwell had planned to rob, now continuing its journey safely. They sat on a bench outside the station, watching as workers prepared for its arrival. "Have you ever ridden on a train, Thomas?" Bridget asked. He nodded. "Many times. It's the fastest way to travel these days, though I still prefer horseback for shorter journeys. Gives you a better feel for the land." "I've never been on one," she admitted. "Father talks about taking me to visit his sister in Denver someday, but the store keeps him too busy." Thomas found himself imagining Bridget's delight at her first train journey, the wonder in her eyes as she watched the landscape rush by. It was a disarmingly domestic thought for a man who had lived by the gun for so long. "Perhaps someday you'll have that chance," he said. As the afternoon wore on, their conversation ranged from books they had read to their childhood's Bridget's in a small Pennsylvania town, Thomas's on a ranch in western Texas. She drew him out, asking questions that made him remember parts of himself he had long buried beneath the persona of the bounty hunter. "You speak as if Thomas Archer the bounty hunter and Thomas Archer the man are two different people," Bridget observed astutely when he made a comment to that effect. The insight caught him off guard. "Maybe they are," he admitted. "Or at least, they've become so over the years." "And which one is sitting here with me now?" she asked softly. Thomas looked at her, taking in the intelligence in her green eyes, the gentle curve of her lips, the way the breeze played with a loose strand of auburn hair that had escaped her bonnet. In that moment, he wanted to be the man she seemed to see in him, not the hardened hunter of men he had become. "I'm not sure anymore," he answered honestly, "but I think I'd like to find out." The admission hung between them, more revealing than he had intended. Bridget's eyes widened slightly, then softened with an emotion Thomas was afraid to name. Before either could speak again, the distant whistle of the approaching train broke the moment. "We should head back," Bridget said, though she made no move to rise. "Father will wonder where I've gone." Thomas nodded, standing and offering his hand to help her up. She took it, her fingers warm against his, and for a brief moment neither let go. Then, with a shared smile that acknowledged something new and fragile between them, they began the walk back to town. The next 3 days fell into a pattern that was both unfamiliar and unexpectedly pleasant for Thomas. Mornings were spent checking for telegram replies and helping Sheriff Cooper with minor duties around town. Afternoons often found him in Bridget's company, sometimes helping at the store, other times walking or riding in the countryside around Humboldt. Evenings were frequently spent at the Whitakers' dinner table, where he found himself increasingly comfortable. Word arrived from Denver that his reinstatement as a marshal was possible, should he want it. The news should have pleased him, but Thomas found himself strangely ambivalent. The life of a marshal would mean leaving Humboldt, leaving Bridget, just when he was beginning to imagine a different future. On the 4th day, as Thomas was considering his options over breakfast at the hotel restaurant, Sheriff Cooper joined him, his expression unusually grave. "Telegram came for me this morning," Cooper said without preamble. 2 of Blackwell's men were spotted in Cheyenne, talking big about getting revenge for their boss. Mentioned Humboldt specifically. Thomas's hand tightened around his coffee cup. "They're coming here," Cooper nodded grimly. "Sounds like it." I've alerted my deputies, but if these men are half as dangerous as Blackwell, they'll need to be stopped before they reach town, Thomas finished, his mind already shifting to the cold calculation of the bounty hunter. When were they seen? Yesterday afternoon. If they're traveling hard, they could be here by tomorrow. Thomas pushed away his half-eaten breakfast. I'll ride out today, meet them on the trail. Cooper studied him. You don't have to do this, Archer. You've done enough for Humboldt already. Thomas thought of Bridget, of the light in her eyes when she spoke of her dreams, of Walter's kindness, of the community that had welcomed him despite his violent past. Yes, I do, he said simply. These people deserve to be safe. After leaving Cooper, Thomas went directly to the Whitaker store. Walter was arranging a display of tools near the front window. Archer, good to see you. Bridget's just gone to deliver an order to the Millers, but she should be back shortly. Actually, it's you I needed to speak with, Mr. Whitaker, Thomas said. There's been word that some of Blackwell's men are headed this way, looking for revenge. I'm riding out to intercept them before they reach town. Walter's face paled. Revenge? Against you, you mean? Against anyone involved in Blackwell's death, Thomas clarified. Which includes Bridget as a witness. Understanding dawned in Walter's eyes. You want us to leave town until the danger has passed? Thomas nodded. Just for a few days. You have family you could visit. My sister in Laramie, Walter confirmed. We could take the afternoon train. Good. Don't tell anyone where you're going, just that you're taking a short trip. And Walter, Thomas hesitated. Don't tell Bridget the real reason. I don't want her to worry. Walter studied him for a long moment. You care for my daughter, don't you? The directness of the question caught Thomas off guard. Yes, he admitted. More than I expected to, which is why I need to know she's safe while I deal with this threat. To his surprise, Walter smiled. Then make sure you come back to her, Archer. I've seen how she looks at you, and I haven't seen that light in her eyes since before her mother died. The words both warmed and terrified Thomas. The possibility of a future with Bridget had been taking shape in his mind, but now he was preparing to risk that future to protect her and the town she called home. I'll do my best, he promised. He was checking his gear at the livery stable when Bridget found him, her expression a mixture of confusion and hurt. You're leaving? She asked without preamble. Father says we're going to Laramie this afternoon, and when I went to tell you, Sheriff Cooper said you were preparing to ride out. Thomas straightened from adjusting Willow's saddle. There's something I need to take care of, he said carefully. It's better if you and your father are away from Humboldt for a few days. Bridget's eyes narrowed. You're not telling me everything. What's really going on, Thomas? He sighed, knowing she was too perceptive to be fooled by half-truths. Some of Blackwell's men have been making threats against those involved in his death. Cooper and I think they might be heading for Humboldt. And you're going to face them alone, Bridget concluded, her voice rising slightly. After everything, you're choosing to put yourself in danger rather than staying safe with us in Laramie. I'm choosing to protect this town, Thomas corrected gently, to protect you. By getting yourself killed, tears welled in her eyes. That's not protection, Thomas, that's sacrifice. And I never asked you to sacrifice yourself for me. Thomas moved closer, fighting the urge to take her in his arms. It's what I do, Bridget. It's who I am. No, she shook her head firmly. It's who you were. The man I've come to know these past days is more than a gun for hire. He's kind and thoughtful and capable of so much more than violence. Her words struck at the heart of the conflict within him, the bounty hunter versus the man who was beginning to dream of a different life. That man is still finding his way, he said softly. Then let him find it without getting shot, Bridget pleaded. Come to Laramie with us. Let Sheriff Cooper handle this. Thomas shook his head. Cooper's a good man, but he's not equipped to deal with men like Blackwell's gang. I am." Bridget studied his face, seeming to recognize the determination there. "Promise me you'll be careful," she said finally. "Promise me you'll come back." "I promise," Thomas said, meaning it more than any vow he had ever made. Impulsively, Bridget stepped forward and pressed her lips to his in a brief, fierce kiss. Before Thomas could react, she stepped back, her cheeks flushed but her gaze steady. "That's something to come back for," she said simply, then turned and walked out of the stable, leaving Thomas staring after her, his heart hammering in his chest. An hour later, Thomas was riding north along the Cheyenne Trail, the taste of Bridget's kiss still on his lips and the memory of her words echoing in his mind. For the first time in years, he had something to lose, someone waiting for his return. The realization both strengthened his resolve and filled him with a new kind of fear. He had been riding for about 3 hours when he spotted dust on the horizon, riders approaching from the north, moving at a steady pace. Taking Willow off the trail, Thomas found a vantage point on a small rise that would allow him to observe the oncoming group while remaining hidden through his field glasses. He counted 4 riders more than Cooper's intelligence had suggested. He recognized 2 of them from Blackwell's camp, but the others were unfamiliar. All were heavily armed, with rifles in saddle scabbards and pistols visible at their hips. Thomas considered his options. He was outnumbered, but he had the advantage of surprise and position. The smart play would be to ambush them from a distance, using his rifle to even the odds before they knew what was happening. It was the bounty hunter's approach, cold, calculating, effective. But as he reached for his Winchester, Bridget's words came back to him. "The man I've come to know these past days is more than a gun for hire." Was there another way, one that didn't begin and end with bloodshed? Thomas made his decision. Mounting Willow, he rode back to the trail and positioned himself in plain view, waiting for the riders to crest the next hill. When they appeared, he raised his hand in greeting, as if he were just another traveler on the road. The riders slowed, clearly suspicious of the lone man blocking their path. Thomas recognized the one in front, Harlan Beck, Blackwell's right-hand man and the most dangerous of his followers. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Thomas called. Heading to Humboldt, Beck's hand drifted toward his pistol. "Who's asking?" "Name's Archer," Thomas replied calmly. "Thomas Archer. I believe you've been looking for me." Recognition dawned on Beck's face, followed by a cold smile. "Well, now saved us the trouble of hunting you down. You're the one who killed Jasper." "I am," Thomas confirmed. "And I'm giving you the chance to turn around and ride away. Blackwell's dead. There's no profit in revenge." One of the unknown riders spat. "Ain't about profit, it's about respect. Can't let a man gun down our boss and walk away." "You can," Thomas countered. "Because the alternative is joining him. I didn't come looking for a fight, but I'll finish one if you start it." Beck studied him, eyes narrowed. 4 against 1. Those ain't odds I'd bet on if I were you, Archer." "Neither would I," came a voice from behind Thomas. Sheriff Cooper rode up beside him, followed by his 2 deputies and 3 other men Thomas recognized as townspeople from Humboldt. "Good thing he's not alone." Thomas shot Cooper a questioning look. The sheriff shrugged. "You think I'd let you face these coyotes by yourself?" "The telegraph operator showed me your message to the Whitakers. Figured you could use some backup." Relief and gratitude flooded through Thomas. Perhaps this was what it meant to be part of a community, not having to stand alone. Beck and his men exchanged uneasy glances, clearly reassessing their chances. "We just wanted justice for Jasper," Beck said, less conviction in his voice now. "Blackwell received justice," Cooper replied firmly. "A jury would have hanged him for his crimes." Archer just saved the territory the cost of a trial. "Here's what's going to happen," Thomas said, his voice carrying the authority of his former badge. "You're going to surrender your weapons and come with us to Humboldt. You'll be held until the U.S. Marshal can transport you to Cheyenne for trial. If you cooperate, I'll testify that you came peacefully." "And if we don't?" Beck challenged. Thomas's hand rested casually near his holstered revolver. "Then none of us will make it to Humboldt. Your choice." A tense silence followed, broken only by the shifting of horses and the distant cry of a hawk. Finally, Beck raised his hand slowly. "Reckon I've seen enough men die for Jasper Blackwell," he said wearily. "We'll come peaceful." Under the watchful eyes of Cooper and his impromptu posse, the outlaws surrendered their weapons and submitted to being bound for the journey back to Humboldt. As they rode, Thomas found himself processing what had just happened, how he had chosen words over bullets, how Cooper and others had come to stand with him, how different the outcome might have been had he followed his old instincts. Perhaps Bridget was right. Perhaps Thomas Archer, the bounty hunter, and Thomas Archer, the man, didn't have to be separate entities. Perhaps there was a way forward that honored both aspects of himself. They reached Humboldt by nightfall, the prisoners secured in the small jail with Cooper and one deputy standing guard. Thomas, exhausted but satisfied with the day's outcome, retired to his hotel room. He would need to ride to Laramie in the morning to let the Whitakers know it was safe to return. As he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Thomas allowed himself to imagine what might be possible now. The telegram from Denver about his reinstatement as a marshal remained unanswered. The bounty money from Blackwell sat untouched in the bank. For the first time in years, the future seemed open with possibilities rather than predetermined by vengeance. Sleep claimed him eventually, and with it came dreams not of pursuit and violence but of green eyes and auburn hair, of a small house on the edge of a growing town, of a life built on more than the hunt. Morning brought a surprise. As Thomas descended the hotel stairs, preparing to ride for Laramie, he spotted two familiar figures in the lobby: Walter and Bridget Whitaker, their travel bags at their feet. "You're back," he exclaimed, unable to hide his shock. "How did you know it was safe?" Walter chuckled. "Cooper sent a telegram last night after you turned in. Said the situation was resolved thanks to your silver tongue rather than your six-shooter. We caught the first train back this morning." Thomas's eyes were drawn to Bridget, who was watching him with an expression that made his heart race. "You came back," she said softly. "I promised I would," he replied, moving toward her almost without conscious thought. Walter cleared his throat. "I believe I'll just take these bags home and open the store. Bridget, perhaps you'd like to show Mr. Archer the new shipment of books that arrived at the station this morning. I'm sure he'd find them fascinating." With a knowing smile, Walter picked up their bags and departed, leaving Thomas and Bridget standing in the hotel lobby, suddenly alone despite the presence of the desk clerk and a couple of early breakfast patrons. "There aren't really any books, are there?" Thomas asked, a smile tugging at his lips. Bridget shook her head, her eyes never leaving his. "No, but I would like to walk with you if you're not too tired from your adventure." They left the hotel together, walking through Humboldt's quiet morning streets. News of the previous day's events had clearly spread, as several people nodded respectfully to Thomas as they passed. "Cooper told us what happened," Bridget said as they walked. "How you faced those men without firing a shot, how you gave them a chance to surrender." Thomas nodded. "It seemed worth trying something different, something other than violence." "Because of what I said?" she asked, glancing up at him. "Partly," he admitted, "but also because of what I've been feeling since I came to Humboldt, since I met you." They had reached the edge of town, where a small park had been established near the train station. Taking a seat on a bench, Thomas gathered his courage to say what needed to be said. For 3 years, I've been defined by hunting Blackwell. It gave me purpose, direction. But it also kept me from thinking about what might come after, about what kind of man I wanted to be when the hunt was over. He took a deep breath. Being here, with you and your father, with this community, it's made me question things I thought I knew about myself. Bridget's eyes softened. What things? Whether I'm capable of being more than a man with a gun, whether I could stay in one place, be part of something instead of always passing through. He hesitated, then added quietly, whether I could be worthy of someone like you. Bridget reached for his hand, her touch warm and reassuring. Thomas, you already are more than a man with a gun. The way you saved me, the way you protected this town, yes. You used your skills as a bounty hunter, but you did it out of compassion, not for reward. I've done things I'm not proud of, Bridget, Thomas confessed. Crossed lines in pursuit of men like Blackwell. That doesn't just go away because I want it to. No, she agreed. But it doesn't define your future either. We all have pasts, Thomas. What matters is what we choose to do with the days ahead. The wisdom in her words struck him deeply. And what would you choose if you could? A slight blush colored her cheeks. I would choose to see where this path between us leads. I would choose to help you discover who Thomas Archer truly is, beyond the bounty hunter. I would choose. She hesitated, then finished softly, you. The simple declaration sent a wave of emotion through Thomas unlike anything he had experienced before. It was as if the final walls around his heart crumbled, leaving him vulnerable but strangely free. I received an offer from Denver, he said, to be reinstated as a marshal. Disappointment flashed briefly in Bridget's eyes before she composed her features. That's wonderful. It's what you wanted, isn't it? It's what I thought I wanted, Thomas corrected. But now I'm not so sure. He took both her hands in his. Sheriff Cooper mentioned needing another deputy here in Humboldt, said the town's growing enough to justify it. Hope replaced disappointment in Bridget's expression. You're considering staying, Thomas nodded. More than considering. I've already spoken to Cooper about it. If I take the position, I'd be settling here permanently, building a life here. With me? Bridget asked, her voice barely above a whisper. If you'll have me, Thomas replied, his heart hammering in his chest. I know it's soon and I know I have much to prove, but I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you, Bridget. You've shown me a different path, a different way to be. And I'd like to walk that path with you if you're willing. Bridget's answer came not in words but in action. Leaning forward, she kissed him with a tenderness that spoke volumes, her hands gentle on his face. When they parted, her eyes shimmered with unshed tears of happiness. I'm willing, she said simply. 2 months later, Thomas stood in Humboldt's small church, tugging uncomfortably at the collar of his new suit as he waited at the altar. Sheriff Cooper stood beside him as best man, a role the older lawman had accepted with surprising emotion. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of change. Thomas had formally accepted the position as deputy sheriff, using part of the Blackwell bounty to purchase a small house on the edge of town. The remainder he had invested in the expanding railroad. On Walter's advice, a stake in the future of the region he now called home. Learning to be part of a community after years of solitary pursuit had been challenging at times. Thomas still found himself reaching for his gun at unexpected noises, still woke occasionally from nightmares of past confrontations. But with Bridget's patient understanding and the growing acceptance of Humboldt's residents, he was finding his way toward becoming the man he wanted to be. The music changed, and Thomas looked up to see Bridget entering on her father's arm. Her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation of white satin and lace, complemented her natural beauty perfectly. As she walked toward him, her eyes never leaving his, Thomas felt a sense of wonder that this extraordinary woman had chosen him, with all his flaws and rough edges. When Walter placed Bridget's hand in his, Thomas made a silent vow not just to love and protect her, but to be worthy of the trust she had placed in him, to continue becoming the man she believed he could be. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying through the small church filled with the people of Humboldt who had, remarkably, become Thomas's people too. As they exchanged their vows, Thomas thought of the unlikely journey that had brought him to this moment, how his pursuit of vengeance had unexpectedly led him to love, how the end of one chapter had become the beginning of something far more meaningful. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." As Thomas kissed Bridget, sealing their union amid the cheers and applause of their community, he silently thanked Jasper Blackwell for unwittingly setting him on the path that had led here to home, to belonging to her. 5 years later, Thomas stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Bridget chased their 3-year-old son, William, through the garden. Their 1-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, dozed in his arms, her small head resting trustingly against his shoulder. The years had brought changes to both Thomas and Humboldt. The town had grown substantially with the railroad's expansion, the general store now managed by Walter with the help of a young assistant, freeing Bridget to pursue her interest in teaching at the local school. Thomas had been promoted to sheriff when Cooper retired 2 years earlier, his reputation for firm but fair enforcement of the law earning him the respect of the community. The nightmares came less frequently now, the ghosts of his past gradually fading as new memories took their place: his wedding day, the birth of his children, quiet evenings with Bridget by the fire. The man who had once defined himself solely as a hunter of outlaws now found his identity in being a husband, a father, a protector of the peace rather than a dispenser of vengeance. "Papa, look what I found," William called, running toward him with something clutched in his small hands. The boy had Thomas's blue eyes but Bridget's auburn hair and spirited nature. Thomas carefully shifted Elizabeth to his other shoulder and knelt to examine his son's treasure, a perfectly formed arrowhead, likely left by the Native Americans who had once called this land home. "That's quite a find, son," he said, ruffling the boy's hair. "Should we add it to your collection?" William nodded enthusiastically. "Mama says I have the best collection in all of Humboldt." "Your mama's right," Thomas agreed, exchanging a warm glance with Bridget as she joined them on the porch. "She usually is." Bridget smiled, taking Elizabeth from him as the baby began to stir. "Your father's being generous." "I'm only right about half the time, but he's learned it's safer to agree with me." Thomas laughed, standing to press a kiss to her forehead. "Wisdom that's served me well these past 5 years." As the sun began to set over the Wyoming plains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Thomas reflected on the unexpected turns his life had taken. From the lonely pursuit of justice to the richness of family and community, from a man defined by his gun to one known for his integrity and compassion. None of it would have happened without that fateful day when a desperate chase had led him to a clearing in the woods, to a brave young woman tied to a tree, to a choice that had changed everything. "What are you thinking about?" Bridget asked softly as William ran inside to add the arrowhead to his treasures. Thomas smiled, drawing her and their daughter close. "About how sometimes the end of one trail leads to the beginning of a better one, and how grateful I am that mine led me to you." In the distance, a train whistle sounded, the evening express heading west toward new frontiers. But for Thomas Archer, once a wanderer himself, The greatest frontier had been the one within his own heart. And thanks to Bridget, it was a wilderness he no longer faced alone.